Hey hunters, I'm Ahmad, and welcome to the Moderately Outrageous Dinosaur channel. This week, we're going to be doing a head-to-head comparison between two sequels. That's right, baby, it's Monster Hunter World Iceborne versus Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Now, some of you may be saying, Ahmad, you just did a similar type of video like this when you compared Base Rise to Base World. Correct, this is what I'd like to call a series where we catalog all of my great and well thought out points so that we can obtain the sweet nectar that is confirmation bias. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get down to it. It's time for the sequel showdown! Before we dive into this analysis, it's important that we set some ground rules with each other. The last thing that I want is for me to be talking about dinosaurs in a video game, and you were telling me how yellow was the best flavor of crayon. With that in mind, Rule 1! We are comparing base Sunbreak to base Iceborne. That means no stuff added in a free expansion, no Fatalis, no raging butthole Brachydios, and no poison knife cat. Rule 2! We will be evaluating the game in the categories of gameplay, music, visual design, and story. Each category is assigned a point value, which is shown on the screen now. Not all segments are rated equally. Gameplay will always be the most important segment because it is the unique lever of games as a medium. Rule 3! In the event of a category tie, I will award both games the point. In the event of an overall tie, it will be up to you wonderful crayon eaters to vote for who you think the winner should be in the comments below. I will tally up the votes, and we will have a community bloodbath. Celebration at reaching a popular conclusion. Rule 4! If you disagree with my conclusion, you can and should respectfully defend your position below. If your position is reasonable enough to persuade me that I was wrong, I will publicly admit defeat and pin the comment that defeated the mighty YouTuber Dinosaur Man for all the world to see. Man, what a prize. Got it? Good. Now, let's dive into my second favorite category, the music. When I discuss music in Monster Hunter, I've historically explained that Capcom leverages the physical sensation of sound to trigger a response in the hunter. Maybe it's the locomotive barreling sound of Tigrex's theme, or even the anxiety-inducing string line of Basil's theme, but regardless of who you're facing, Capcom uses sound to alert the player of the significance of the monster they're fighting. This means that all music in Monster Hunter is good at a baseline, making my job infinitely more difficult. To differentiate the successful execution and determine which game has a good soundtrack and which game has a great soundtrack, we have to take a step back and look at the motif of each expansion. What theme are they trying to sell to the player? Let's start with Sunbreak. As I've mentioned numerous times throughout my other Sunbreak content, Capcom has drawn a not-so-subtle inspiration from classic horror when developing the expansion. Malzeno is a vampire, Luna Garan is a werewolf. Like I said, it's not so subtle. But that doesn't mean it's not interesting. Horror as a genre takes the traditional emotional palette of an entertainment medium and flips it on its head. It decides to play with anxiety and fear in order to entice the media consumer to be placed in a panic state. These negative emotions almost enrapture the consumer until the climax of the narrative, at which point a flood of dopamine squirts into your brain and you forget about shitting your pants in the living room and just say, man, wasn't it fun being scared? Sunbreak encapsulates anxiety into the construction of multiple theme songs, but the best example is within Malzeno's theme. Now, I've done a full analysis of this song in my initial Sunbreak review, so for the sake of time, I'm going to paraphrase. If you're interested in the full analysis, then go check out that video. It'll be linked at the end of this video. Malzeno's theme builds layers of instrumentation throughout the song to create an audible ascension. The song gets louder as more instruments are layered in, almost as if you're climbing up a hill with no end. Our brains are wired to find some kind of conclusion and find a pattern in things, and with the constant layering of instruments, it very easily tricks us into thinking that there is in fact no end at all. You pair this with the actual fight of Malzeno, who is relentlessly attacking you, and you have a recipe for an anxiety sandwich. On top of that, I think Capcom selected some very great instruments to play through the orchestra, namely the pipe organ. Through the composition and instrumentation, this song ties directly back to 1, the goal of horror as a genre to induce a negative emotion and have that be the catalyst to spark interest, and 2, the thematic inspiration of the creature, namely a vampire. Malzeno's theme makes it very clear that Capcom had a very clear vision when creating their compositions, and they did an excellent job of tying the musical elements of Sunbreak back to its core motif. Now, let's assign the same standards to Iceborne's soundtrack. Initially, I was looking at every monster theme and asking myself, what motif does Iceborne hold? It just seemed like good random songs, and sure, Sunbreak had that too, but Malzeno's theme stuck out as something so well thought out. Then it hit me. Iceborne's motif is that of an age of exploration. The opening to world is that of excitement, of going somewhere new. Now we're in Iceborne, and Iceborne is the middle of the story. And like many middle parts of many stories, we're in an unfamiliar place, and we really don't know where to go. And the song Succession of Light really ties into that feeling. The song opens with a solo piano. The piano paints a mystery, causing me to ask the questions of where am I? Around the 50-second mark, the rest of the orchestra joins in, iterating on the Monster Hunter World theme song, bringing out warm feelings of curiosity and inspiration. This takes my initial worry around the mystery of where I am and flips the perspective. At 1 minute and 15 seconds, the tonality of the song shifts to that of curiosity and intrigue, a gentle excitement pulses throughout the orchestra. It's what I would imagine I would be hearing if I was going through the woods and finally discovered a glade full of flowers. Or in this case, a glade full of frozen flowers. The song credits the worry of the explorer, but reminds us that there is a true wonder and beauty in the world, and that our exploration is going to forge the path for the rest of our team. It's invigorating. If a song that captures both the worry and wonder of exploration doesn't tie into the motif of exploration and discovery, then I really don't know what does. Once again, I'm stuck crediting the cleverness of Capcom and their ability to produce quality soundtracks. So this leaves us with a problem in our comparison. What I've told you is that Iceborne and Sunbreak both have great soundtracks that tie into their respective motifs. Well, there is one difference between these two. I don't know if they ran out of money or time, but Sunbreak forgot to create themes for two of its brand new milestone monsters, the Gormgolm and Lunagaron. Now, these monsters were literally master rank level up monsters, and they were new. They should have had their own theme songs. This miss was actually pointed out to me in the comments of my previous video, so shout out to Toxic High Dragon for pointing this out to me. Now, I understand that Iceborne didn't really have the need to come up with new themes for their milestone monsters, like Glavenus or Nargacuga or Tigrex, but they sure as hell made sure they had something distinctly their own. To me, this was a huge miss by Capcom and is a critical differentiator between the two. Yes, both soundtracks are great, but only one soundtrack is complete, meaning the win in music goes to Iceborne. Now, let's dive into a topic that has traditionally given me headaches, that being the story. The narrative of a Monster Hunter game, simultaneously the one thing that matters the least in the Monster Hunter formula, while also being the one critical thing that makes sure the game drives forward with some kind of purpose. You'll recall from my initial comparison of base Rise and World that I said Monster Hunter Rise didn't have a story at all. And World had, well, at least some kind of narrative justification for our actions. I'm happy to inform everyone that Sunbreak fixed all my initial issues with base Rise. Sunbreak opens up by establishing a mystery. There are spooky monsters from a distant land being mean, and it's up to us to figure out why they're being mean by brutalizing them until they're non-verbal. This is where we run into our new cast of characters and they tell us that some reptilian funny business is going on and they'd like our help. Capcom has established a mystery and it's literally enough of an incentive to convince me that I need to apply Darwinism and drive a race of dragons to extinction. The story isn't a focus of these games, but it can't be neglected entirely, otherwise the player will have no reason to do anything. Now, if you look really closely at Iceborne, you're going to see a lot of similar story beats to what we just discussed in Sunbreak. You mean like Capcom can only write one type of story? In Iceborne, you go out on a hunt and the handler goes and gets yourself in trouble. You see a bunch of Legiana are migrating in an unusual fashion. You report back to the base and they say, oh, and on top of that, there's this weird noise inciting a panic in the monsters. We should go explore that and save the ecosystem. Yet again, Capcom demonstrates their ability to establish a mystery. What I've learned from this is that Monster Hunter is at its best when we're playing the role of Scooby-Doo with the greatsword and gallivant across the maps trying to solve a mystery. I personally like both of these narratives. I think they both have some excellently choreographed cutscenes, and they both have well-placed dialogue so that the intrigue of the mystery is heightened without providing too little information to leave the player clueless. While the cast is an area I'd traditionally inspect for differences, I'm happy to report that both games have a very memorable cast of characters. Iceborne has characters like the Admiral, Babushka Cat, and even though we hate her, the Handler. Sunbreak matches that energy though. One of my previous comments was that the surrounding cast of Rise felt relatively forgettable. Sunbreak's alleviated that issue through the introduction of the support quest system. The support quests have you go on a hunt with each NPC. It makes these characters feel lively and a part of the world, and now you have a memory of hunting with Utsushi or Admiral Gallius or Elder Fugan. It also delivers some tangible rewards for completing these quests that are significant upgrades as you're progressing through Master Rank. It's the ideal way to make characters interesting. While the majority of these comparisons so far have been pretty equivalent, there is one huge differentiator, and it's actually in how memorable each quest is. While all the quests in Iceborne are good, there is one standout quest in Sunbreak that left me speechless. The quest where the Quiro-infected Lunagoran is absolutely brilliant. You open up to a scene where all the small monsters are dead on the ground. Then, as you progress to the target, the game just has a dead Zinogre on the ground too. At this point in the game, Zinogre is one of the hardest Master Rank fights you've probably had, so just having a dead one on the ground is basically a power play by this monster. Intertwine this with the lack of music and you actually have a creepy atmosphere established. When I saw the Zinogre, I audibly said, oh shit. I absolutely felt like I was about to get my cheeks spread by this fight. This type of atmospheric presence sends Sunbreak ahead of Iceborne in my mind. While both narratives are good Monster Hunter stories, Sunbreak just had this little extra oomph to sear this quest memory in my mind. The point goes to Sunbreak. Now, let's unpack the visual elements of both games. In my last sequel showdown for Monster Hunter, I said, effectively, World has better graphics, so World wins. Well, between now and then, I've received more of an education by finishing the first grade and have received the power of perspective. This is not me saying that I'm wrong, but to say that there's even more nuances for me to analyze outside of good graphics. When analyzing visual design in Monster Hunter games, I like to slice it up into 5 distinct chunks: monster design, hub design, maps, weapon and armor design, and artistic direction. Monster design is exactly as it sounds. It's the design of monsters and how that design integrates within the world that is being built by the developer. Sunbreak has a very clear motif. If you watch my review on Sunbreak, I think I indicated that Sunbreak pulls inspiration from classic horror icons like 85 times. That's why we got the vampire dragon that goes suck and the werewolf monster that goes slice. Yes, we got plenty of other monsters from other games too who are really well designed, like the Aspinus and the Gormagala, but Capcom's motif was clearly indicated in the way they designed their milestone creatures. And I think that Sunbreak did a fantastic job of integrating their theme with their major new monsters for the expansion. But that's part of the problem when comparing Sunbreak and Iceborne. They only tied their milestones into the theme. Contrast that to World, where the theme is that you are in a new continent brimming with shit that's got a bad attitude and enough weaponry to put a militarized police force to shame. The theme is much broader. You're an explorer, and every new creature is presented to you in a way where the only real reaction is, holy shit, that's a Glavenus, or holy shit, that's a knife cat. You're constantly in a state of discovery for every monster instead of 3. Okay, well, what about the hubs? With Iceborne, we received the snow village of Celiana, and in Sunbreak, we received the maritime port town of Elgato. Elgato is a bustling town full of industry. There are shops everywhere, there's various machinery everywhere, it's a very energized town. Contrast that with Celiana, where the pockets of people are often found huddled inside of one of the cozy huts. There is some industry, but it's toned down because it's cold as hell in Celiana. Ain't nobody got time to be selling fucking... Wait, what is that? Is that lemonade? Is that cat piss? I don't know. Ain't nobody got time to be selling cat piss in the frigid tundra. Despite the cold, it makes the village feel cozy. I can literally feel the warmth of Babushka Cat's hut. This ties into my personal thoughts on how these hubs should be designed. They should be a break in pace. Hunting is already plenty exciting. I don't need a high energy hub. I need the calm before the hunting storm, as it were. A place to kick my feet back and pet Poogie. Yeah, there you go. Hey, fuck you, Poogie. If you haven't been able to tell, that's 2 wins so far in this category for Iceborne. Let's see how the last 2 segments go. Iceborne maps play with verticality. You have hidden caves, ravines, and tree hovels across all of the different maps, and inside of those pockets you're likely to see palico coves or small monster domains. This makes the maps feel like they're actual living biomes rather than just a series of interconnected arenas. Tie that in with the little touches all throughout the biomes nodding to the existence of monsters. Rut marks, snot, and yes, even shit on the ground shows that these creatures exist inside these gorgeous and complex maps. These complex maps also weren't that hard to navigate because of how many different camps there were scattered throughout each zone. And you may be wondering, why am I picking up this imaginary bat to beat this imaginary dead horse of why the hell aren't there more camps in Sunbreak? Whew. So how does Sunbreak's maps compare? Sunbreak does not innovate on the exploration of verticality in maps. Oftentimes the maps are very flat, interconnected segments of flat arenas. Now, I'm not saying that there are no crags or valleys or mountains, but it's not to the same scale. All the arenas in Sunbreak are flat zone number 1, or flat zone number 2, or if we're lucky, flat cave number 3. It's like all the hunting takes place in Wyoming, out in the plains, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, just you in this big open space to fight monsters. Fuck. But to be a little more positive to Sunbreak, it does kick the dog piss out of Iceborne in the weapon design department. All of Iceborne's weapons are basically, here's a sword, I glued a blue feather on it, or here's another sword, I glued a red feather on it. Neat. Sunbreak is like, here's a molten dragon dong and a shield made out of wyvern cloaca, or this is the head of the 9th Kulu Yaku village chieftain. We put that shit on a stick and called it a hammer, or here's a big ass fish. You're welcome. It definitely feels like there's a cool factor to the weapons in Sunbreak that's definitely lacking in Iceborne. So now we're down to the most eloquent talking point when discussing game design. Graphics. I'm not going to mince words. Nothing has changed between Rise and Sunbreak. It is limited by the Switch and does not portray the same monster realism or biome realism as Iceborne. You could argue that Sunbreak is stylized in a certain way, but that doesn't change the fact that the rendered Raytheon in World looks better than the rendered Raytheon in Sunbreak. Iceborne has smashed this segment by claiming 3 out of my 4 visual design elements and claimed victory for the overall category. Whew. Now it's time to dive into my favorite category, that being gameplay. But before we start, let's recap the points. Currently, Sunbreak holds 2 points and Iceborne holds 4, meaning whoever wins the gameplay section will win this showdown. So, if you need to go refill the drink, go get some popcorn, then go do it now, because I'm about to unleash a fat load of hot, steamy, objective knowledge on you guys. So without further ado, let's dive into gameplay. Dissecting gameplay for one Monster Hunter game is a monumental task in its own right. You have all these different weapons and all these different monsters and all the way those weapons interact with those monsters. Then you have all these secondary farming systems and palicos. And finally, behind all of that, you have your end-game treadmill that keeps the grind fun. So, when approaching this section, I told myself I needed to take a step back and break up the segments into the following categories: monsters, weapons, expansion gimmicks, and the end game. Regardless of the Monster Hunter game, these are the core elements that will always be present. There will always be a lot of monsters, a lot of weapons, cool new systems to try out, and an end game to play into. I'm going to attack this topic in that logical order so that we can provide structure to this conversation. Let's start with monsters themselves, and let's start with some numbers. Base Sunbreak has a total of 17 new monsters, and I'm including variant monsters in that count as well in case you're wondering. Base Iceborne has a total of 19 new monsters in its initial release, and again, I'm including variant monsters in that count as well. Both titles expanded the movesets of existing monsters while introducing these new monsters for players to sink their teeth into. This means that both expansions fundamentally achieved the goal of toppling difficult foes with really neat weapons. The core requirement of monsters and hunting has been met. The only difference is that Iceborne did it with 2 more monsters. Does that mean by the simple virtue of having more that Iceborne has won the entire gameplay category by having 2 more monsters? No, that would be stupid. After all, on this list of monsters, I can tell you right now, Viper Tobi Kadachi isn't that cool of a variant, and same goes for Night Night Paolumu. But I think that having some hard data gives us a good launching pad to start to draw conclusions or similarities. In this case, we can conclude that both games are delivering high-quality fights worthy of being called G-Rank. These fights are tough, they are spectacular to behold, and they mix new monsters, variant monsters, and returning favorite monsters so that every Monster Hunter player has something to look forward to. This just shows that Capcom does make some truly fantastic games. So, no huge differences in the monster category. Let's move into the weapons themselves. Both Iceborne and Sunbreak have the same weapon count, so that would be a silly metric to look at. Rather, we're going to identify the method in which weapon use was expanded. Sunbreak added switch skills, and not like 2 switch skills. They added 42 new switch skills that change the way your weapon works in some way. Meanwhile, Iceborne expanded the core moveset of each weapon through the introduction of skills like the Special Sheath, or Perfect Rush, or the Hunting Horn Tornado Death Attack, and the Gun Lance IED. This means that 14 core changes were made across Iceborne specific to each weapon. Well, then Sunbreak is better then, right? I mean, if we apply the logical argument of a bigger number, then we can see that 42 is much bigger than 14. Well, hold your horses, you silly bomb badgie you. This is a classic argument of quality versus quantity. Yes, there are 42 changes total. Not all of them are great. Some of them are just changing your base combo, and that doesn't mean that you're expanding the combo button inputs, you're just changing the animations up. A lot of the changes are just providing access to a counter for weapons. For instance, the Greatsword got a counter, and Team Darkside has made sure that everyone knows how balanced it is. But then on top of that, you've got the bow who got a counter, and the switch axe who got a counter, and the charge blade got a second counter that's also an animation cancel, and the sword and shield, they've got this guard point KO ballbuster attack on top of their 2 other counters and attack mitigation skills. The point is that Sunbreak's solution to everything is give it a fucking counter and move on. It's not bad, just kind of all the same. But let's give credit, not everyone got a counter. I mean, look at Lance. Yep, he's just jumping. You keep doing that, buddy. Heavy Bowgun got these power rings that speed up your bullet velocity and play with critical distance a little bit, which is admittedly pretty cool, I guess. But my one question is, didn't we already have ballistics, which gave us a permanent critical distance increase? So couldn't I just save a wire bug and use ballistics? While some weapons did get really cool new abilities, not all of them were created equally. Let's contrast this to Iceborne. 14 changes. Sword and Shield had the introduction of Perfect Rush, which gave them more damage options and decisions to make in their decision tree. Previously, the answer was always fly up in the sky and bonk the monster on the head. Now you had the legendary second branch of big damage animation commitment, and if you were an elemental Sword and Shield, well, I mean, you're pretty much just doing this, like, forever. Then we had this huge change with Longsword. You got access to the Special Sheath. Previously, you only had Foresight Slash, but now you had an even higher risk, high reward counter added to your kit. Again, your option tree was expanded further, allowing you to spend more time floating up in Weeb Heaven, dropping Helm Splitters like the little anime protagonists you are. But you know, I couldn't leave out the Greatsword. The greatsword unlocked the capacity to funnel glue directly into their brain by skipping the charging portion of the true charge slash. On top of that, the big number got even bigger by introducing the power hit. If you landed the first hit of the true charge slash, it amplified the damage of the big final hit of the combo. Copy paste the last 3 points across the remaining 11 weapons because everything received a change of this caliber. The weapons did not receive a lot of different small changes, but one huge game-defining upgrade. So, which is better? I actually think the answer to this question is connected to the gimmicks implemented in Iceborne and Sunbreak respectively, that being the Clutch Claw and the Skill Scroll system. Iceborne's Clutch Claw introduced the ability to wallbang a monster at will and open up an attacking opportunity. This meant, at will, the player could shower their brain in delicious happy brain chemical and beat some monster ass with reckless abandon. More importantly, it gave the player the ability to weaken monster parts if you had a big weapon or shave off rare slinger ammo if you had a small weapon. Both of these are good because tenderizing a monster part allows you to activate weakness exploit and do even bigger number. If you're a small weapon, a lot of your new game redefining weapon upgrades revolved around slinger ammo. The Clutch Claw played into the idea of being a tactical hunter, especially if you were a big weapon player because it made you focus on hitting the weakened parts of the monster. This played into the traditional Monster Hunter game ideology of being patient and precise. Sunbreak's gimmick is the red and blue scroll system, which allows you to swap your silk bind loadouts on the fly. This means that now you can bind your situational, high animation commitment attack with your guard, and in a flurry of button presses, have choreographed an entire anime tournament arc all by yourself. This actually ties into Sunbreak and Iceborne's philosophical differences when it comes to game design. Sunbreak is more aggressive, which isn't a bad thing. In fact, I think flipping ideology on its head is a really good thing. It often clears up the path for innovation and progression. The concept of having 2 loadouts that you can change on the fly is cool. Pair that with the ability to do the scroll swap shuffle and you can work yourself into a spot to get a positioning advantage. Capcom even added in skills that gave you different buffs based on which scroll you're using, like Dereliction. I think conceptually, Capcom was trying to give Monster Hunter a high-octane action game flow. However, here is the problem. Players aren't really incentivized to master swapping around. In fact, most players probably just plop all the stuff they want on the red scroll and only get to the blue scroll on accident in the midst of a flurry of panicked button presses while they're trying to dodge the Malzeno Ass Blaster 5000. The gimmick is effectively unused by the majority of the player base. Even if you're a Dereliction Giga Chad, you do the exact same thing as a normal player, except at the beginning of the hunt, you make sure you've swapped to your blue scroll to do some more damage. So, while I love the concept of scroll swapping, it would be disingenuous of me to say that it didn't have some design flaws in its implementation. But there is a counter-argument here, right? And I think it deserves some credit. The argument is, but Ahmad, what if you're just bad at the game? Maybe. I'm not above admitting that my whole argument could be hinged on user error. Yeah, that's a real possibility. I'm not a speedrunner, I'm just some guy on the internet making a video. Okay, fair. Let's say for argument's sake that Iceborne and Sunbreak are on even footing when it comes to the perspective of weapon enhancements and the gimmicks added to the game. After all, this category decides who wins all the marbles. Let's settle the debate by talking about the final subcategory of gameplay, that being the in-game treadmill. Iceborne's in-game treadmill was locked behind 2 systems, decoration farming and guiding lands material gathering. Decorations were gathered through killing the greatest Jagras and through the big angry investigations. The harder the investigation you did, the more gems you got, which would bring you closer to completing your build. You needed to do the guiding lands to add weapon augmentations to your in-game weapons, which were the big King Ding Dong buffs that made your weapons super monster killing machines. In both of these situations, you were being encouraged to hunt a lot of monsters. It was a revolving door, and there was a pressure for you to do these hunts as fast as possible to increase your odds of getting what you want. The more hunts that you did, the more gems you could churn out, the more materials you could generate. Now, there are issues with this treadmill. By making your decorations random, you have a lot of variables in your build tied to RNG. This means that you are often left with huge gaps in your build, which removes player agency. It also meant that when you got a decoration you were hunting, you got super excited. In addition to this, both of these methods are exclusively tied to gameplay, which I think systems that encourage you to play more are a good thing. Now, pin that explanation because it's time to start comparing Sunbreak. Sunbreak's primary loops are behind talisman melding and afflicted monster hunting. Talisman melding is just submitting monster materials into the slot machine so that the talismans can be spit out of the slot machine. You get a batch of talismans completed every time you complete a hunt, which is pretty much the same as the decoration reward system. The pro of talisman farming is that you often have smaller holes in your build to patch. This increases player agency, which is a good thing. Now, let's talk about afflicted monsters. Afflicted monsters are monsters that have been infected by the Quiro, and due to that infection do increased damage and have these floating red zones that are weak points that will rupture when damage is done to them. These afflicted hunts will drop afflicted materials which are used to create your rank 10 weapons. Now, when the monsters are introduced to you, the hunt process is explained to you in the following ways. Accurately target the red zones and they will pop. Then you will get a big damage window. Okay, that sounds cool. I need to be precise so that I can get my opportunity to do huge damage. That sounds really cool. And it would be really cool if that was actually the requirement to pop the red zones. Actually, you can just kind of hit them wherever you want and you'll get a knockdown. So when you remove that factor, all you're left with are monsters who have more health and do more damage. But maybe that's not a bad thing either, right? I mean, with them being afflicted, I'm sure they have new attack patterns to track and there are different fights, right? Nope. Ugh. Fuck. I hate them. These are literally mirror matches to what you fought as you progress through Master Rank. So what that means is, we have to fight harder monsters that are only difficult because someone took a number slider and slid it all the way to the right until they just took a long time to complete. They just took the arch-tempered concept, which most people hated, I might add, and applied it to the shitty low-rank monsters that nobody likes to fight. If you are the sadist who asked for arch-tempered Lagombi, send me your mailing address so that I can just send you a custom hoodie with an angry rabbit on it. Maybe if you get that, you can just keep all those bad ideas to yourself. If your treadmill hinges on the difficulty by number slider idea, then you need to rethink your treadmill. Sunbreak's treadmill is incomplete in its current state. Iceborne's treadmill was fun. It was go and hunt a ton of monsters that weren't copy-paste health sponges. And for fighting all the rapid-fire monsters in Iceborne, you were showered in rewards. You know what your brain does when it's showered in rewards? And it can optimize the reward cadence? It squirts delicious cat piss-flavored dopamine straight into that wrinkle sponge between your ears. Woo! Capcom, you need to take afflicted monsters and make them different from their unafflicted counterparts. They should behave differently. They're mind-controlled. Why are they behaving like they normally do? Okay, rant over. The treadmill makes the winner very clear to me. Iceborne takes the win in gameplay. So, there you have it. Iceborne cleans house by pulling 9 total points by winning visual design, music, and gameplay, while Sunbreak pulls 2 points through a victory in story. The summary is that Sunbreak is not, and I repeat, is not a bad expansion. Far from it, actually. But Iceborne was such an incredible, complete package. Sunbreak's core struggle is that it feels incomplete in a lot of areas. We're missing some critical soundtrack pieces, some more fleshed out map design, and more importantly, the in-game treadmill is death by number slider. I still fully recommend Sunbreak, and I've been having a lot of fun playing lately. But what do you guys think? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think you can change my mind? Then drop your arguments down in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, then drop a like and subscribe. It really helps out with the algorithm. I also wanted to save this for the end, but to everyone who watched my Sunbreak review, thank you guys so much for watching. You all were incredibly positive, and for a small YouTube channel like myself, it really means a lot. So thank you guys, and I'm really glad that you've enjoyed the content. So until next time, keep thinking critically about games, and I'll see you in the next one.